This is the Bitcoin is Freedom panel. I'm joined by my friends Jimmy Song, Katie, I always screw up her last name, so I'm just going to say Katie the Russian, and Aleks Svetski. To start this off, and also I'm Parker Lewis. I help coordinate alongside our friend Kaylee the Bitcoin Commons, and I work at Unchained. So to start off, though, I thought that it would just be helpful if each of these three could give a quick background on themselves. They can introduce themselves better than I can. So Jimmy, will you start us off? Just give a little bit of your background and specifically how you contribute in Bitcoin.
I am a code monkey, have been for 20-something years, and I guess I contribute by writing lots of articles and maybe some code sometimes. You've
got a programming class too.
Yeah, I do that. There's a bunch of stuff, but go read words on the internet. That's really the thing that I produce. Lots of words on the internet.
All right, and Jimmy's 4 books, as Michael mentioned, are up in the front. Thank God for Bitcoin, Bitcoin and the American Dream, Programming Bitcoin, and the Little Bitcoin Book.
That's right.
All right, Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie the Russian, and I sell passports.
Can you explain, as featured on Fox Business, I believe it was, can you talk a little bit?
My star will keep rising.
A little bit about
if you know the reference.
Plan B. What is Plan B?
Yep.
Can you just say something about Plan B?
So I help individuals to obtain a second passport for a variety of reasons. I help them to implement a jurisdictional arbitrage strategy, basically play a game based on government rules, but in order to benefit yourself. So we find the best jurisdiction for you, we execute for you, and obtain more freedom for you.
Svetski?
I may or may not have been Katie's first customer, because I'm an extremely well-behaved person, apparently. I guess similar to Jimmy, I write a lot, and my plan is by next year to also have 4 books on this table. I do have one on the table that I co-wrote with Mark Moss called the Un-Communist Manifesto. So that's a fun short read. Basically a big finger to all the clown world stupidity that we're seeing at the moment in the world. These days I spend more time writing and producing content. Previously, in a past life, I was building Bitcoin businesses. One of note was one of the first dollar cost averaging apps, kind of like the Swan of Australia. It's called Amber. It's also now available in the US. But I kind of wanted to get out of the entrepreneurial racket and spend more time using the pen to ridicule the stupidity that we're seeing in the world today. So that's my shtick these days, write and shitpost. Am I missing anything? Oh, fuck, actually, and the most important thing, fuck. Why do I always forget that? There is a publication that I work on called The Bitcoin Times, which Jimmy has written in it, in edition 3. In fact, Parker was also in edition 3. Have I got that right? Both of you were in edition 3, right? Yeah, that's right. So it's a once-a-year annual publication where I kind of bring together people who I believe have a lot of value to add, thinking about Bitcoin from different angles. And the Promethean edition, which Parker and Jimmy, etc., wrote for, is going to be relaunched this year as a physical hardcover collectible. The design will make you jizz in your pants, okay? That's like how good it is. It's fucking amazing. And this year we're also coming out with edition 5 as well. And the writers, I finally convinced Michael Goldstein to come back out of hibernation. So him, Pierre, Seyfedin, Tour de Mista, Parker's going to write for it, and Conrad Graf. So it's going to be the Austrian edition. So that's going to come out on the 31st of October. So every year, 31st of October, White Paper Day, there will be a new edition of the Bitcoin Times for 21 editions over 21 years. And then I'm going to finally fucking retire, and you'll never hear from me again.
That will be freedom.
Finally.
All right. So to start off, I wanted to talk about and we will talk about this subject as well, the separation of money and state and what that means. But I want to start more on a kind of day-to-day basis, personal level. Have each of you guys talk about a different way, and we could go one by one on how Bitcoin increases personal freedom and ultimately contributes to greater freedom as a whole, but more on a personal level. Jimmy, can you provide an example of that?
Funny you should ask that, Parker. I think I wrote a tweet not too long ago about this. But I think for me personally, it's getting out of the corporate world, not having a boss. And it was an interesting journey because it took about a month of sort of getting up the gumption to go do it, right? Because I had only known the comfort of having an employer who would pay for my health insurance and you know, I don't know, have a job, right? Like, and it took about a month of sort of thinking about that before I actually did. And I went off on my own, and like a week into it, I was like, why didn't I do this earlier? I think the thing that Bitcoin allowed me to realize is, you know, there's freedom, and you don't even recognize the chains that bind you. And that's one of the big themes of my life, I feel like, that I didn't really realize, is there are things that keep you down, that sort of restrict you, that make you act in ways that are not really yourself. And once you get rid of those chains, you realize just how much of yourself that you've been restricting. So, you know, before, and you can kind of see it in my writings, like early 2017, I'm very careful about what I say. I'm very diplomatic, politically correct, whatever. And then things just start shifting. I just say whatever I feel.
It's that meme, who radicalized you?
Yeah, and there's something about that where if you care too much about what other people think, and that's sort of like a fiat mentality, is you have to care because your employer kind of owns you. So if you don't do the things that your employer expects from you, or believe the things that your employer expects from you, then you are, you're not yourself, right? Like you're basically their drone or something. And getting away from that, I think, for me was extremely freeing. And it's not something that even people like Bill Gates, I think, have. Even though he might have all the money in the world, he's still sort of captured by that fiat system, and he still has chains that he can't get rid of, and that's priceless.
How many of you are signing a resignation letter tonight?
So I think that's, you know, a really important part of Bitcoin. I think maybe a slightly different angle I would take on it is that when you start to store the fruits of your labor in a form of money that works in your favor versus one that works in direct opposition to you, it restricts your freedom. And that over time, as the value you've converted into Bitcoin increases, you don't have to work unless you want to work, and you get to work on the things that only that you want to work on. I still work for the man, but I only do it based on choice. I could walk away tomorrow and not feel like I had to work, and that's also very freeing. So I think kind of Bitcoin as a store of value creates a lot of optionality.
Not just that, though, because you see opportunities where you didn't see them before, and you see ways to make money and provide value. And the thing about storing value over the long term is that you're constantly looking for ways to add value to other people. If you can find ways to add value, you could probably get paid for it. And if you can get paid for it, great. Now you don't have to work for the man, right? Like, that's the key. That's what we really want to do.
Katie, you're a founder. Can you talk about another element of Bitcoin that has increased your personal freedom, or one that you see in others?
If you ask me that question about a year ago, my answer would be completely different. But remember, I recently became a mother, so all these hormones, and I'm still very sensitive. So right now, my definition of freedom would be the ability to live the life of your dreams. And usually, the person that stands between you and your freedom and you and your perfect life is not a Biden, Fauci, or even Charles Schwab. It's you. And what Bitcoin brought to all of us, and I always say that freedom equals discipline, discipline equals freedom. And what Bitcoin taught a lot of us is this low time preference mentality, or self-discipline, self-ownership, et cetera, et cetera. So now, as you know exactly what the life of your dreams is, and you know who is the person who needs to put effort into achieving there, like you actually have this ability to be disciplined, to proceed with the steps to get to this life of your dreams, which is the freedom for me. So I think this click in your head that Bitcoin brought to, I'm sure, many of you, is exactly what really makes the difference for many of us.
Yeah, I think that Bitcoin allows you to see that you're in control of your own destiny. And it doesn't mean that you probably always make the right decision or that there is a right decision, but it's attainable, and then that makes you more critical about yourself and empowers you to actually act when you otherwise might not have. Svetski?
I'm going to just try and tie off both of what the guys said. So time preference is an interesting concept. Who here is familiar with time preference? Just out of curiosity. Okay, everyone. Okay, cool. So we've memed that into existence.
Who's not?
Who's not? Actually, that's a good question. Okay.
All right, we got
cool.
a few people out here.
So really simply, I'll define it. Time preference is the ratio between how much you value the future versus the present. The lower your time preference, the closer the relative valuation between the two. So the idea is that we'll always value the present more than an uncertain future. And where human behavior gets really skewed is that when you completely discount the future and you only value the present, then you basically behave more like an animal, right? You behave purely instinctually. You don't plan for the future in any way. And morality, in many ways, is, I guess, related to this idea of lengthening your time horizon and actually planning for the future. So increasing the relative value of the future. And Seyfedin and I have been talking about this recently, particularly for his piece that he's going to be doing for the Bitcoin Times. So it's going to be really centered around how time preference impacts human behavior. Now, if time preference is central to human behavior and morality, how do you try and increase one's time preference, if you want to be a better human being? Because kind of like what Katie said before, discipline equals freedom. I would also argue that freedom is nothing without responsibility. So that's another piece. You guys can help me. I'm trying to meme into existence Bitcoin is responsibility go up technology. That's kind of like what I'm really trying to push, is that as we begin to think about lowering our time preference, how do we do it? Savings, I would argue, is the cornerstone of civilization. Savings allows you to, as Parker said, store the fruits of your labor, store the product of your labor in some way, shape, or form, such that you can then use it or access it later on down the track. It allows you to plan for the future, and these things are extraordinarily important. So to tie that back to my life in particular, I led a very crazy decade in my 20s. You fucking name it, I've done it, in terms of getting in trouble, in terms of like blowing businesses up, in terms of getting arrested, in terms of fucking you name it, I've tried it, right? So, sorry, I forgot there's kids here, I shouldn't swear. Don't do what Aleks did, okay?
Discipline.
Be a good girl. Yeah, discipline. See, I had no discipline. I mean, I had discipline in my 20s, but I kind of directed discipline in the wrong ways. But anyway, I didn't really have a good time preference skew. And the older I've become, the more I've started to appreciate that. And particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, where I think many of us have been radicalized. I, funny enough, left Australia for 3 weeks. And here I am 3.5 years later, and I refuse to go back there. And what happened was, during the original round 1 of the Clown World scamdemic, I found myself trapped in Germany, at a Tinder date's house, of all things, and got locked down with her, right? And things kind of went AWOL from there. And the thing that kind of saved me during that period, because I got very vocal about lockdowns and whatever else happened, that I actually got debanked. I had my credit cards canceled while I was overseas. Like all sorts of crazy stuff happened because I was quite vocal about things. And the one thing that was always untouchable, that gave me kind of that feeling of invincibility, which is sort of what Jimmy said, was the fact that my Bitcoin is kind of locked up in all these convoluted multi-sig arrangements that God couldn't even touch. And basically, no one can touch my wealth, ever. Like, there's nothing ever that's going to happen. And I mean, the risk to that is obviously I get amnesia, then no one's ever going to touch it, but that's going to be my donation to the, to the Bitcoin network, making it a little bit more scarce. But you're welcome. So please don't throw a brick at me or something, please. But anyway, I think that kind of level of, savings, it number one, it helped transform me a little bit. So I am, believe it or not, a little bit more measured than what I used to be. I'm a little bit more mature, apparently, than what I used to be. And I think Bitcoin really impacted that in many ways. And it's also allowed me to still toe the line because I have savings and I know that I'm not dependent on the permission of some government or state or whatever to have to censor myself overly. So anyway, I think that's just a very empowering thing for people to think about. I'll shut up now.
So I think that idea of essentially having censorship-resistant money is very freeing. But before I move on to another subject, just talk a little bit more about the ability to physically move geography. I want to get Alex and then Katie's, because a lot of the work that Katie does, the freedom that affords, where when you're making decisions about your personal life, actually being in a decision point to say, if I want to pick up and go to place else that's going to treat me better, respect my rights more. Just talk a little bit about your experience making that decision of where you were going to go and how having Bitcoin from a monetary unit perspective contributed to that.
Well, I'm Katie the Russian, so you might have guessed that I wasn't born and raised in Texas. And with the latest events happening in East Europe, my business would be really affected by all that. I had employees in both Ukraine and Russia. Thankfully, we're not dependent on the government agenda. We did not start hating on each other. We've been friends this whole time, and we still work together with both people from Ukraine and Russia. But the thing is, I can no longer send any salary to my Russian employees. They were completely ostracized of any monetary network that goes out of Russian borders. So the only way I can pay to my employees in Russia is Bitcoin. And thankfully, I can keep running the business. They can keep getting the value in terms of, fiat currencies for providing value to Plan B Passport as employees. And that would be one way to be borderless money and how I exercise that.
Alex?
Yeah, I might just touch on an idea of that. Who's familiar with Gigi here on Twitter? Okay, maybe I should ask the reverse. Who is not familiar? You need to be on Twitter. No. Okay. So anyway, Gigi is a good friend of mine, and he and I kind of went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole at a very similar time, and we've had all these crazy weird epiphanies. And one of the things he talks about a lot is this idea of Bitcoin being the first information money. And Knut, actually, who's another author in the Bitcoin space, he talks about Bitcoin being the information element. Is like humanity is finally Bitcoin's interesting. It's both a discovery and an invention. I guess the discovery is this idea that we had to find information or energy conservative money, and Bitcoin's kind of humanity's invention of that discovery. So it's a mind-bending idea. But the fact that Bitcoin is now fundamentally information changes the paradigm significantly. In the past, like if I wanted to travel across a border, I don't know how many people here travel on a regular basis, but generally when you enter a country, you have to declare whether you've got X amount of money on you, and that number is usually about $10,000. In what universe does it matter how much money you're bringing into the country, and why do these moron statists want to know? Like, it's the most backwards idea on the face of the planet, and it infuriated me every time. Like, even before I knew about Bitcoin, like, I've always been kind of like, mind my own business, and you mind your own business and stay out of my shit. And whenever I used to see that when I was traveling, when I was younger, it used to infuriate me. And Bitcoin kind of changes that paradigm, because the question is, am I carrying Bitcoin? I mean, I don't know. Where's the Bitcoin stored? Am I carrying it in my head? Am I carrying, like, is it on some magic ledger somewhere? As Michael Saylor kind of says, it's, money is a ledger in the sky. Like, point to the Bitcoin, please. Show me. What is it? It's information. And that really, chucks a wrench in the whole paradigm that the state operates within, which is they give you permission for everything that you've worked for. They tell you whether you can keep it, how much you should have, what you should do with it, and all of that sort of stuff. So anyway, being able to travel with information / energy money is, I mean, I hope that kind of answers what you're asking, Parker, in terms of traveling. It shifts the paradigm. Like, we're playing a completely different game, and these clowns that are playing their weird games just can't. They're incompatible, and that's one of my favorite things about Bitcoin, is that it's just fundamentally incompatible with the current status quo.
Yeah, that's what I was getting. Katie, you want to add anything?
Yeah, can you bring this money that are supported by monopoly on violence through this imaginary line that also supported by monopoly on violence? Yeah. Basically.
Ridiculous.
Jimmy?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's difficult to talk about the freedom of Bitcoin without thinking about the restrictiveness of fiat. That's really what we're talking about here. And what you realize as you study money and study fiat currency is that there are all manner of restrictions. Not the least of which is that the savings gets taken away from you. At least for me, the real freedom in Bitcoin is this ability to save and store your value. And that's something that we've really lost. And once you can store value, you can actually go pursue other things. And we're so wrapped up in the fiat system where we're so concerned with surviving, right? Like just making it through the day so that we can, survive essentially, instead of thinking about, okay, what do I actually want, right? The fiat games that we play are, let's just make it to the next promotion. Let's go do this and have a career or whatever, instead of thinking about like the deeper, more purposeful things. And that to me is what I've seen everywhere. And I'm sure many of you have sort of like had that experience where you're like, okay, well, now I have some savings, and I'm good for a couple of years. I could actually go afford to go do whatever I want. What do I want? And it's not a question that a lot of people actually ask, because you think of what you want within the context of the fiat monetary system, which is almost always just go for that next promotion, or this, maybe go pitch to a VC or something like that. It's not really about, okay, what's your deepest need, right? Like as a human being, what's your purpose in life? And those are questions, once you start asking them, are very long term. And when you ask those things and you realize you have the freedom to actually go pursue that stuff, that's massively freeing. That actually takes the chains of fiat monetary system off.
Okay, that's a good segue into, or related to my next question. So I think one of the contracts that I like to think about Bitcoin is that it is valuable because it's immutable. It's impossible to change Bitcoin's fundamental consensus rules, and most specifically or importantly, it's fixed supply. But there's a saying that people, or there's a saying that Bitcoin changes you more than you'll ever change Bitcoin. And I'm going to throw you guys a curveball, but it's related to this question. It's kind of a two-part question. I want to just kind of open it up. Given all the things that have happened over the last couple of years of restricting people's freedom, I think a lot of times we sit in the state of Texas and everyone here loves freedom. In the world, do you think that most people really value freedom or understand it? And then if you could kind of answer that question and then talk about how Bitcoin changes how people think about freedom, and using any examples that you guys have experienced either individually, tangibly, or that you've seen in others. Jimmy?
Can you repeat the question? It's a
So-
little long.
So we talk about freedom. We all assume that most people
Uh-huh.
value freedom, but we've also seen people accept a massive restriction of freedom, and Bitcoin really helps people value freedom. So if you could talk about just how and why you think the world has trended in the way that it has, and how Bitcoin might help reverse it.
Yeah, the opposite of freedom, or the desire for freedom, is this desire for safety, and that's almost always dependent on how scared they make you, right? And that's exactly what happened the last two and a half years. It's okay, if you don't do this, everyone's gonna die, right? Then it became only old people are gonna die, and then old people are gonna be inconvenienced for 3 weeks. The goalposts kept moving, but it was all about scaring you into submission, and that to me is a far more sinister problem, and it requires a skepticism of the sort of like the main narrative, right? The conventional wisdom, and that's very hard for a lot of people, because you say what you will about conventional wisdom or the main narrative or whatever the news tells you. And the reason why people believe it is because it's comforting. Okay, I know what's happening. I know what I need to do, and if I follow these rules, then I will be safe, and that's what they're told. It's very scary for them to go out into this new world where you have to go and verify things yourself, right? Okay, wait. What they're telling me is not right, and this is the thing about Bitcoin is you get orange pilled, you start looking at all this other stuff and go, wait, you mean like breakfast cereal isn't healthy? Wait, running actually causes all your cartilage to wear out. Maybe that's not very good for you. All these things that you think you knew, you kind of have to unlearn. That is way scarier for some people than following some rules like, stay at home every day for a month and don't go outside or whatever. And that's I think what the dynamic at play here. The degree to which we demand freedom is the degree to which you aren't scared. Fact of the matter is most people are scared, and they're very easily scared. We, as a society, just lack courage. And that's not a virtue that comes very easily. And there's that whole meme online, right? Hard times create good men, and good men create good times, and good times create soft men, and soft men create
Somewhere close to that.
Something like that. Whatever. You guys understand, right? We've all grown soft because we've had years and years of good times from fiat monetary expansion and Pax Americana and the dollar hegemony. All of these things have contributed to all of us becoming utterly soft. And what that means is that we are very easy to scare. And that's what the world has experienced the last few years.
So you said before that in order to understand the freedom that Bitcoin affords, you really have to understand how the legacy system constricts freedom and how it drives control. So maybe Katie and Alex, you guys talk about kind of that legacy system and how it restricts freedom, how it co-ops systems, controls people, and how Bitcoin helps reverse that.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was gonna mention. I bet half of you were complete statists before discovering Bitcoin, and that's okay. You grew up in that, and that's okay. They're doing really good job at brainwashing us from very, very young age. And what Bitcoin did, it exposed how bad is the system you grew into is. You grew up, whatever. English is a second language. You got it. Yeah, so once it's exposed that the system that you believed in is complete BS, and now you're like, okay, let's look at the other rabbit holes. So now you start looking into all kind of things that you believed were true, and that's another step into, again, freedom. And just like Jimmy mentioned, like all these things, schools, food, like all these things that they taught us were wrong. You now started realizing that they are wrong because you discovered Bitcoin, right? Okay, I can. You say it better in English.
No, that was amazing. Lucky I understand Russian. So I was taking some notes while Jimmy was talking. I wasn't on Twitter. So as Jimmy was talking, I thought of the responsibility thing again. So I think the erosion of responsibility is like the Faustian bargain that also erodes freedom, right? So I think we get nannied. So I'm sure everyone's heard of the term, nanny state, right? Like we get babied and nannied by the state. And basically what they do is they strip responsibility and agency from you. Like, like in France I saw recently, it's like, oh, it's too hot outside, so we've banned all the festivals. It's like, bro, if it's hot, I'll decide whether I want to go outside or not some moron bureaucrat, right? So they keep like eroding agency. And basically what happens is people devolve into, I don't know if you've seen the movie WALL-E, the Pixar movie. We evolve into these blobs sitting on a chair. And I remember when I first saw like the electric scooters come out, I was like, shit, WALL-E's arrived in real life. Because people would like jump on a scooter just to go across the road. So the other thing I want to mention is also I've written here, I underestimated the lemmings and their capacity to adapt. So many of you know me and my writings. So the lemmings, if you were born in kind of like the 80s or whatever, or younger, there was a game called The Lemmings, and it was a computer game where these little creatures, which were kind of like subhumans, so they were lemmings, they would basically walk in a particular direction, and you had to save them from falling into the lava because they would walk right into the lava and die. So anyway, what I realized in the last couple of years is that the world is full of lemmings, and less so full of humans. And unfortunately, what I and many of us underestimated was the lemmings' capacity to adapt. And what I mean by this is, if you asked me 3 years ago and said, Alex, do you think that people would like go to a restaurant and like wrap themselves in 3 face diapers just to eat? And I'd be like, no way. Exactly, see? She's like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I would have said, yeah, like no one has that much of a low level of dignity to do that. And what happened? The whole world went and like continued to support these businesses while wearing face diapers. And adaptability is an interesting thing with human beings. It's like we either adapt to freedom by taking on responsibility, or we adapt to slavery by discarding responsibility and agency. And that's a very different world. And that's sort of like, as Katie said, is, I hand on heart, was probably I don't think I've ever been entirely a statist because I just caused way too much problems since I was young. So I was always somehow anti-state, but probably like a hybrid, trans statist or something, But, Bitcoin definitely radicalized me. It made me see through all of that sort of stuff. And, once you've kind of, taken the glasses off and you see the stupidity for what it is, you can never go back. And this is the thing. What we're trying to do with Bitcoin, fundamentally, I believe, is build a world in which people take on responsibility so that we can have a more free world, as opposed to, dropping and discarding responsibility. Like Francis Pulio and I discussed this. He called it the game of responsibility ass covering, and I kind of called it the game of responsibility hot potato. But you can take whichever game you want to do. But that's the world that we're living in. So what we want to do is we want to take on responsibility again. And I think Bitcoin fundamentally is responsibility go up technology. That's what it is. And that is what actually enables a more free world. So my 2 cents.
All right, I'm going to give you one last question down the line. Talk about specifically how the legacy monetary system exerts control and coerces certain kind of society-wide behaviors, and then how Bitcoin, by separating money and state, helps reverse that course. And looking for tangible examples. So you could use Canada, Russia, sovereign.
It's called China, please.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that comes to mind is, as Alex was talking, the thing that I thought of were communist societies, right? Almost all of them have this very interesting, like, people that kind of come out of it. So I was in Budapest in like 97 or something like that, and this was senior year of college. I studied abroad, and I was in a study abroad program with like 30 other students, and we hung out with some locals there. And one of the things that the girls in the program said was very interesting to me. Said, the one thing that I've noticed is all these guys that are the same age as us, they're way more immature, right? I was like, that's interesting. That's an interesting observation. And this is related to what Alex was talking about. They've never learned responsibility. All their agency was taken away from them. That's what socialism does. You don't have any responsibility, so you have no opportunity to mature. And I think that's ultimately what, like going towards this sort of like socialism kind of thing does is, and of course it's the fifth plank of the Communist Manifesto is, a central bank that controls everything, right? Like controls the money. This is the direction in which things go, is people have less responsibility, the state takes more responsibility, and you become more subject to the state, and you become more subject to their reality, even if it's not true in the least. And we're always at war with East Asia and not Eurasia or whatever quote you want from 1984. But this is the direction it goes, where you no longer regard truth. It's all about authority, and you don't have any responsibility, but you also have no sovereignty. And those two things kind of go together. And what I've noticed in the United States as I've gotten older is people are less responsible, more flaky, more liable to depend on government services or other people or something like that. There's no character anymore, right? Like that's been going down as people get more and more flaky, right? It used to be like crazy that you said you would be somewhere to meet somebody. That's pre-cell phone, right? Like, and they weren't there within like 10 minutes or something like that. Now it's like flaking out, ghosting people. Like that's a normal occurrence. That's what the fiat monetary system does, and it does it at an accelerated rate. And you get sort of like this systemic breakdown because agency is taken away and no one really learns responsibility. So that for me is like the biggest sort of indicator that we're going towards a much more socialist communist system and away from one where we have self-sovereignty.
Yeah, the way I like to say that is you outsource your decision making to the government. They don't really ask, but you do outsource the decision making. And there's not a single person in the world who knows what's better for you than you do. Like, even if I outsource the decision making to my dad, he would probably send me to a law school, which I'm a proud dropout. I didn't do that. But now you outsource it to the state. My parents at least love me. The state hates you. And that's something you need to always remember. They will never have your interest at heart. And that's where all this is coming from. But my example for that would be, I'm trying to remember the date. I think it was Black Thursday, I think we call it, August 28, 1998, I want to say. In Russia, it was an event where we had a complete currency devaluation. Basically, the amount of money you had to the bank, you decide to do a bank run. You come to the bank, there is a dude with AK-47 saying that no, you don't have money in this bank account. And you know, in my lifetime, I went through like 3 hyperinflations of my currency, and that's how they take the money away. And all that was possible just because it's a fiat system, was run by geopolitical bullshit. And if you're in the wrong country, you will lose your savings, and that's just gonna happen. Maybe you guys been comfortable again. You've been through good times for the last many, many years. You haven't seen hyperinflation, but it is coming. And now not just we know that, but a lot of people know that. So that would be my personal example of how fiat system fucked people up.
But then how Bitcoin helps fix it.
That's right. Bitcoin fixes it.
It's just the statement.
How does it fix it?
No. Sorry,
I'll use the
Parker. There is
example.
no how. It's just Bitcoin fixes it.
Bitcoin
right?
does fix it.
That's the meme.
He's
I don't
asking
think
you
she
a
wants to
question.
explain. It's good.
Sorry, I talked over you. He was
No,
asking
it's
how.
okay.
How does Bitcoin subvert the guys with guns outside the bank to prevent them from
There is
accessing
no
their
bank.
devaluation?
There is no bank, Parker.
Yeah,
There
explain
is
that.
no bank. And we have guns, Parker. Now we have guns.
All right, Svetski, how does the legacy monetary system control people's behavior, and how does Bitcoin fix it?
Okay, I will answer that in 1 second. I just want to throw one more little anecdote because it seems like people are picking up on my responsibility thing. This is good.
They're laughing
So
at your
let's-
accent, not at your jokes.
Hey, we're both English as a second language here, okay? Give me a break. So I think just to riff off what Jimmy was saying, I think it was Jordan Peterson who said this. He said, you know you're an adult the day you realize that you know your parents can't make the decision for you. So it's kind of like the day you must make a decision and take agency yourself is the day you're an adult. And I think the overwhelming direction and force of the state, and particularly, once again, as Jimmy said, and I wrote a freaking book about this, is like communist states want to basically be your parent. They want to be your daddy, your mummy, your grandma, your nanny, your grandfather, and everything for you, right? And they want to make all decisions for you, you know? And there's idiots out there who think this is a good idea because they want to basically be Peter Pans and be kids forever. Now, being a kid is cool, right? But, you know, you have less responsibility when you're a kid. And that's fine. So you enjoy that, and your parents pay for everything, and that's all good. But there comes a point when human beings must grow up and become adults. And I think what we're seeing is a regression in civilization. We're seeing an infantilization of civilization by virtue of the fact that we don't take responsibility. And so to tie that into an example, I had one recently where I was using one of these neobanks because I obviously got cancelled from the banking system in Australia. And I was using one of these neobanks to try and send some money around. And I just sent like a normal transaction. It was $1,200, nothing major, so that I could go and buy some Bitcoin. And it wasn't to the Bitcoin service yet. What I did was I sent money from my account to my account. And it got flagged for God knows what reason. And it took 3 weeks to get my money back. I was like sending them death threats and God knows what else over email. Like, you know, maybe that didn't help. But the very fact that they could do that absolutely infuriated me. Now, I didn't start with death threats. I kind of ended up in death threats. And that maybe it did help because I got my money in the end. But like, what people don't realize is, you know, people talk about, I have money in the bank. You know, it's, sorry, bro, the bank has money in the bank, not you. And they don't even have money in the bank. They've just got some digits on a virtual screen. Like, money's been virtualized. Number one, it isn't there. And number two, it definitely ain't yours. So people kind of are living in this fairy tale land where they own nothing and they think they're happy. I don't know if that reminds anyone of anything. We're kind of already there. So, you know, Bitcoin fundamentally obviously fixes that, is that I no longer have to seek permission from anyone to perform a transaction. And this was interesting recently, actually, is with the Bitcoin Times, is I'm kind of developing a new website, and we're going to be selling the hard copies of the Bitcoin Times. And the guy that I've got helping me develop the website is like, oh, so do you want to set up Shopify and this and that? I was like, bro, I would not degrade myself to accept like, toilet paper money conjured up by leprechauns in central banks. Like, I want Bitcoin, and that's the only thing I will trade the product of my labor with. And the beautiful thing about this is that anyone, anywhere can pay me for a product or service that I produce, and I don't need Visa. I don't need, the permission from some bureaucrat. And that just bypassing is really important. And this, I'll probably end on just one final note, is that Bitcoin is a paradigm shift. And I always laugh at people like, Ray Dalio, who, they write whole books on paradigm shifts, and the outcome of their entire book is that China's going to take over. It's like, all right, bro, no worries. Like, these idiots are so blind to the things they're even talking about, is like, they don't see the paradigm shift is happening right before us. It's like, Bitcoin is fundamentally a paradigm shift. And what's most important about Bitcoin, and this, I talked about this in a talk I gave in Salvador, is that Bitcoin is important because it's incompatible with the existing system. And that means that, like, when people go out and they try and change Bitcoin and, adapt it to fit some modality for, mass adoption, is usually the siren call of the scammers. You end up getting, people like Roger Ver or Vitalik, and all of these people. Every single shitcoiner and scammer you see out there is someone who tried to bend Bitcoin and change it to their will based on their definition of what mass adoption was about. They wanted to make it compatible with the existing system. And Bitcoin is a big fuck you to the existing system. It is completely incompatible, and it ain't gonna change. And that's what we need to, like, adapt to it, and we need to move into that paradigm. So,
all right, let me just add one more thing, because this is what adds, like, your ability to have agency. You have to take agency over your own keys, right? And that is frightening. Right? It could be a lot of money that you have in Bitcoin. You have to be responsible for it. And this is what ultimately changes you slowly, because you start taking responsibility for other things, starting with your money. And money is sort of like optionality for the future and all this other stuff. That's what gives you agency. This is what starts you on that journey towards figuring out, what is it that you want? What's your ultimate thing that you want to achieve? And that's a wonderful thing, because that's what creates civilization. That's what gets people to build, because you have this low time preference behavior, and you're thinking about the future, and you're wanting to build because you have learned responsibility. And securing your own keys is just step one, and it's the first step of a very fruitful journey.
Thanks, Jimmy. I think everyone was about to clap for me, so we'll just clap.
Give Alex a hand. All right, we've been going for a couple hours, but if people want to ask questions, why don't we just take one or two, and then we'll be around to answer.
And what happened to the AC now?
Don't say anything about that. We asked the building not to turn it off at 7 p.m., but they just can't get it right. Any questions? Yeah.
Question for you, Jimmy, or all of you. So with the time reference and all that, first of all, Americans aren't safe. We're like animals we talked about. I think 70% of Americans don't have $1,000. But Jimmy, you have children, right? So have you become cheaper?
Have I become cheaper?
Yeah, like you spend less because you realize, or are you more philanthropic?
Well, so my behavior is pretty interesting, because before getting into Bitcoin, I was a complete cheapskate. Like I look for, like, the credit card deals where I could churn and make $500 worth of airline miles, and go on slick deals and buy the rip off the company that made a pricing mistake and just buy like 1,500 of it or whatever, and then sell it on eBay. I was that guy. The thing that I realized after getting into Bitcoin is that that's actually, you've just bought yourself a job. And there are much more effective jobs that you can do that pay way better. And in a sense, like my mentality has shifted, because it's like, okay, instead of seeing my salary as fixed, once you go off on your own, then this is one of the sort of like subtle mental things that changes, is that you realize, you could just go make more money if you just put some more time into it, right? Like I can do another class, or I can go and consult somewhere, or I can write another book, or I can do another steak dinner, whatever. There are lots of ways in which you can make money, and like saving money by doing all of these like hacks, that's just another job that you're doing. And that mentality shift for me was critical in like realizing, okay, instead of trying to rip off everybody, right, which is essentially what a lot of these deals are, right? They're loss leaders for these companies or whatever. Instead of doing that, just go provide value. And if people find your, product or service valuable, that's going to give you a much better return. You just have to figure out ways to monetize the skills that you currently have. And that's the way of Bitcoin. That's the way of saving. That's the way of, like sort of preparing for the future. And that's way more effective than trying to be nickel and dime everything. And I don't know, this is something that I try to teach my kids is go add value, guys. Like, because ultimately that's what's going to differentiate you, because everyone has unique skills and abilities and things like that, and go find your niche in the market, because there's probably something that not many people can do that you can do, that if you provide it, you're going to get paid well for. And figuring that out is part of this whole thing thing we call the free market.
Any other questions?
I could add a little bit to that. So to the spending thing. So I grew up pretty like on the poor side of things, and so I, same as Jimmy, you end up growing this muscle in some way to like be a cheapskate on everything. As I've matured, what you end up you got to just value your time, right? Is like, how much time am I going to spend nickel and diming? And what I've just tried to do is I've just tried to simplify things. So the only thing I spend a significant amount of money on is good food. Otherwise, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do shit. I just sit at home, write. I go and walk in the sun. I go to the gym. I go to a cheap gym. And then, the only thing I really spend money on is food. That's like literally it. So I kind of like have my little indulgence, and then everything else I kind of standardize to, be cheap.
I'm a woman. We don't have this issue. Fine.
Yeah, my most expensive asset.
And that's the thing, right? Like, once you start saving, you spend it on the things that are important to you instead of crap that nobody cares about.
Asset.
Yeah.
Asset. Yeah, literally.
Did you just call her an asset?
Yeah, literally. She is a big asset.
All right, we'll all be around, so people starting to get a little out of control there. But let's give them all a hand. Thanks to Michael and the awesome Bitcoin Club for organizing. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, guys. Oh, we'll be signing some books and stuff on the side.
Come get your books.
Hey, and I wanted to show something shamelessly.
Wait, guys, wait. Katie needs to show something.
So if you're one of those who used to be statist and now you're a Bitcoiner and you're discovering all kinds of other rabbit holes, on August 25th, here we're hosting as the Underground Citadel.com. Basically, we're talking about everything Bitcoiners need to know outside of Bitcoin. So we're going to be talking about hunting, we're going to be talking about natural birth, all kind of health stuff, unschooling, and more and more and more. You just go theundergroundcitadel.com.
It's called
August 25th.
natural birth.
The Underground with a V. Katie. Theundergroundcitadel.com. August 25th, right here at the Bitcoin Commons.
BitBlock Boom is that same week. BitBlock Boom, it's a Bitcoin-only conference right here in Austin. Check it out, bitblockboom.com. Thanks, everyone.